Well, hello and Happy New Year to you guys there at CenterPoint at all of the campuses. My name is Chris Bell, and I'm the lead pastor of Three Circle Church in Coastal Alabama. And your pastor, Brian, is a dear friend of mine and has been for years. And it's my honor to be speaking to you guys today. We're really excited about the new year. I know at our church, and I know you guys have so many great plans. And what I want to talk to you about today as we kick off this new year is the idea that there's some unexpected things that are probably going to happen over the next year for you. I know that we all have our plans, right? You kind of have your workout plan, and you have your diet plan, and you have your financial goals, and all those things that we do. And by the way, I'm not the guy that's going to come in here and tell you to not do those things. But what I would say to you is that probably your plans aren't going to go exactly the way you wanted them to. That's probably going to be the case. So, since that's probably going to be the case, I want you to get more comfortable with the idea of interruptions and things going a different way than you expected. Let me give an example of what happened to me just a few months ago, and I think it'll help you understand this principle. So just a few months ago, I was invited to speak. I live in Coastal Alabama, and I was invited to speak at a conference in Tampa, Florida. And I had a flight all ready to go. That's about an 8-hour drive from where I live. So I had a flight. And I'm a dad, just like a lot of you parents. You don't want to miss your kids' games. And my son ended up with this big basketball game that was going to happen right about the time my flight was leaving. So I made that tough choice, and I said, I canceled the flight. I rented a car and went to my son's game, and then I drove all night through Alabama, through northwest Florida. I made the big turn. If you know what the map looks like, and going on the edge of the Gulf of Mexico, I take that big right turn that turns you south, and I start going down through Florida. And I drive all night to Tampa, and I do the conference. And then the next day, I'm coming back. I'm coming back home in my little rental car. And so I'm going north on I-75, and I know you guys are in New York, but I bet you know a little of the geography I'm talking about. I'm headed north on I-75 through Florida, and at some point, I'm supposed to turn left to be able to go west through northwest Florida, kind of that big L that you know about. So I'm supposed to go west to get back to where I live in Coastal Alabama, here in Fairhope and Mobile, Alabama. But what happened is, I don't know how you guys are, but when I'm going down the road and driving, man, I'm listening to podcasts and I'm listening to music, and I was having a really good time. My attention span is limited anyway, and I looked up and I saw a sign that said, "Welcome to Georgia." Now, what that means is I drove right by my turn. I went by my turn on I-75, I'm going north, and now I'm headed to Georgia. And I knew that was a problem. So I had not been paying attention to my GPS, and so I pull out my phone and I say, reroute. I just plug in my home address again, and I assumed that it was just going to turn me south on I-75 again and take me back, but it did not. You know what it did? It took me down these back roads that I'd never been down in my life, and I've driven this area a lot. But it was an interruption. I thought that I had it all set up. In fact, I talked to my wife. I told her exactly what time I was going to be home. But now the plan has changed. I did not expect to miss my turn. I did not expect what was about to happen. So my iPhone takes me down these back roads. And guys, I'm going to tell you, I ended up driving in one of the most beautiful areas I've ever been in my life. Massive oak trees and old school looking farms and ranches, and this whole area of the edge of Georgia and Florida that I was driving down trying to get to I-10 West. It was absolutely gorgeous. I would have never seen any of that. And then I drive up on this sign, and it says, "Welcome to Madison, Florida." I'd never been to this town called Madison, Florida. Well, it turns out Madison is this old, like, historic, has a lot of Civil War era homes and stuff like that. It was absolutely gorgeous. I start seeing these beautiful homes. I can't believe how gorgeous it is. And then I see a sign that says, downtown Madison. So I was like, well, I'm already late. I might as well take a look. So I take the turn. I go to downtown Madison. It's even more beautiful, guys, than the ride I'd taken so far. It's gorgeous. It's this 200-year-old town, and the place is awesome. So I pull in, and now I'm hungry, and I'm like, I got to get something to eat, right? So I see this place called Grumpy's Diner, and it looks old. So I walk into Grumpy's Diner. It's one of those places when you walk in, everyone's looking at you, and they're like, that guy's not from here, and that's fine. And I get to the counter, and this old, and I know I'm talking to a New York crowd today, but this older Southern lady, and if you think my accent is Southern, man, you should have heard this lady, okay? I mean, this is one of those old school Southern accents that they don't really pronounce the R's, and she looks at me, and she, of course, old Southern grandmas, just so you know, call everyone honey, okay? So she says, "Honey, how can I help you?" And I told her the story about how I missed my turn and all that good stuff. And she loved the story. She looked at me and she said, honey, you've come to the right place, because you have come to the place that makes the greatest sandwich you will ever have in your life. And now she had my attention. CenterPoint, I'm telling you, she had my attention at this point. And she began to tell me about their famous sandwich called the Gobbler. Now, it's called the Gobbler because it's a turkey sandwich. But I need everyone at every CenterPoint campus to help me now, because I want to tell you how she pronounced it. And this is Old South here. You don't use the R. She didn't say the Gobbler sandwich. I bet you know where I'm going. She said the Gobbler. All right, so everyone say it with me at all the CenterPoint campuses, the Gobbler. It was the Gobbler sandwich. And she told me, she said, you go walk around downtown for 15 minutes, you come back, and I'm going to make you this sandwich. It's going to blow your mind. So I did that. Beautiful town. I come back 15 minutes later, and she presents me with this amazing sandwich. In fact, right now I'm going to show you a picture of that sandwich. You're going to see it. It's going to make you so hungry. Even though you're getting on your new diet plan, this is going to make you want to have one more bad, unhealthy lunch when you see this thing. Let me tell you what's on the sandwich that you just looked at. So they slow roast this turkey in-house for a couple of days, right? Hours and hours and hours. They brine it. They do all that stuff. They thinly slice it. They put it on this incredible bread that they also home make. And then, let me tell you what else. There is stuffing, which in the South we call dressing, okay? And y'all call it stuffing. That's on there, like Thanksgiving, Christmas stuffing is on the sandwich. And then to finish it all off, they have a jalapeno cranberry sauce that they put on it to just finish it off. And I know right now at every CenterPoint campus, you guys are starving. And you're like, I want that sandwich right now. But you can't get that sandwich unless you go to Madison, Florida. It's a long drive from New York, but I tell you all that to tell you this. I think it's one of the best sandwiches I've ever had in my life. And now I tell everybody about it. And it would not have happened had my plans gone the way I wanted them to go. And what I want you to understand is your year is not going to go the way you thought it would go. But if you follow God, He will reroute your life in a way that will do things that you can't imagine. And I guarantee you that God has some things in store for you that you never thought to even dream of if you will follow Him. That ended up being an amazing interruption. Now, what I want to do is take us to the Scriptures now, and I want to take you to a place where Jesus interrupted everyone's moment, everyone's day, everyone's party in an amazing way. It was an important party and it was an important day, and Jesus totally interrupted it. But it ended up being one of the greatest interruptions ever. And my hope today is that every CenterPoint campus, as we look at these verses, that there would be an interruption for you, that you would stop for a moment and think about what you're going to hear today. Let me give you the background. So Jesus at this point is in His ministry, and He's walking with His disciples. He's doing ministry, and they decide that they're going to go to Jerusalem to this feast, this festival. The Jewish people had several feasts and festivals, and probably the most revered of all of them was the Passover, okay? But the one we're going to look at today is known as the Feast of the Tabernacles. Sometimes it's called the Festival of the Booths. Okay, let me tell you why that is and a little bit about this feast, this festival. So these guys would go to Jerusalem, all the Israelite people that could, they would make it back to Jerusalem, and they would have this Feast of the Tabernacles. And this harkened back all the way to the Old Testament when the people of God, way back in the Old Testament in the Exodus, when they were out in, and if you're not familiar with that, it's this great story in the Old Testament about how God provided for His people in the desert. And so when they were in the desert, they ran out of water. Funny enough, out in the desert in the ancient world, there were not Aquafina machines and Yeti coolers, okay? So they ran out of water, and God provided them water, all the water they needed, fully filtrated. I'm sure it had pH balance, all that good stuff. It was like perfect, electrolytes, it was great. He provided that for a million people in the middle of the desert. And so they celebrated that for years and years and years, all the way up until when Jesus came. They were still celebrating once a year the Feast of the Tabernacles. Now, while the Passover feast was the most revered, a lot of people, their favorite one, because it was so fun, was the Feast of the Tabernacles. Let me tell you why. The Feast of the Tabernacles could be compared to our modern day tailgating. And I don't know if you've ever done that or not. It's huge here in the South because, I don't know if you know this, we play really good football down here. And we win a lot of championships. I'll just leave it right there, especially in the college football world. But we like to tailgate, and we like to go to the games and set up out there, and people will set up their tents, and they will cook and all that good stuff, and it's fun, it's amazing. Well, that's what they did at the Feast of the Tabernacles. These people would come back to town, and the city of Jerusalem would allow it, that you could, on the sides of the streets, you could build your own mini tabernacle, and that's what they would do. And as you could imagine, year after year, they would probably compete with one another to see who would do the best mini tabernacles, just like tailgating. And they would spend a week out there on the streets, and if the people came from outside Jerusalem, they would have a spot on the road to do their mini tabernacle. The people who already lived there would build one on their own residence, and it was fun, and they would drink wine and dance and music, and it was a fun week, and everyone loved to go. If you can imagine that environment. In fact, let me show you some pictures right now of what that looks like. These are the mini tabernacles. This is what the Feast of the Tabernacles looks like, and it's amazing, and it's fun. Now, you can imagine that going on, but let me give you the background. So once they got there, they spent the whole week building their tabernacle, having fun, fellowship, and celebrating the goodness of God. But then there was the last day. And the last day of the Feast of the Tabernacles was known as that great day. And we're going to look in the book of John. If you want to turn there in your Bibles, it'll be on the screens and the handouts as well, I'm sure. Go to John chapter 7, and we're going to look at verse 37 and go through verse 39. Now, on that last great day, here's what would happen at the Feast of the Tabernacles. At the Feast of the Tabernacles, everyone's had fun all week, but on that great day, everyone would get quiet and reverent, and they would all line the streets so that they could get a view of what was about to happen. And the priest would come out from their place, and they would come out with these big golden, like big vases, if you will, these big containers, heavy, big, golden, and they would be empty, and they would go to this particular place, and they would fill them up with water. Now remember, why are they filling them up with water? Because that's what they're celebrating. That in the desert all those years before, God had provided them water in the desert. So they would fill those containers up with water, and then they would carefully walk back to the altar where they would pour it all out. And this was done in complete silence. Everyone would watch. This would take a long time, and the entire crowd, a massive crowd, would be completely silent. It was a reverent moment. It was an important moment that was taking place here as they brought that water down the road. And then when they poured the water out, the place would break into this massive celebration, and they would quote these verses from the Old Testament, one from Isaiah and one from Psalms. And they would quote these verses that thanked God not only for the water in the desert, but for his promise of salvation. So they connected what he did in the Old Testament to what he would do in the future, that he would provide salvation for his people just like he gave that water in the desert. And when that would happen, everyone would shout and everyone would celebrate. But on this day, they never got to that moment, and here's why. Because Jesus is going to interrupt the entire festival. So he goes back to Jerusalem. The disciples have no idea what he's going to do, and here we go. In John 7, verse 37, all of that's been going on, and that great day, and the priests are walking down with the water, and everyone's quiet, and John tells you in verse 37, on the last day of the feast, remember, we just explained what that is. That great day, Jesus stood up, and he cried out. And if you know anything about the original language, cried out means loud. I mean, one thing for you to know about that, it means he's shouting at the top of his lungs. Very, very loud. And what does he shout? Can you imagine? It's the quiet moment. No one has ever done this. You don't interrupt that moment. And yet he does. He interrupts their day, their week, their feast, their festival. He's interrupting their religion, their lives, because of what he's about to say. He cries out, if anyone thirst, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. Wow. Not only that, he says, now this he said about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for as yet the Spirit had not been given because Jesus was not yet glorified. John is telling you what's going on here. So let's talk about what just happened here. First of all, Jesus interrupts the entire feast and the festival. My little boy, when he was a little boy, he's now 14, but he was a little boy, he would say the word awkward a lot. It was one of his favorite words, and he couldn't say his R's, and he would say awkward. And so we'd be sitting at the table, and if someone said something, out of place, or if someone spilled their drink at the table, my little boy would just look at everybody and go, awkward. Well, you know what? This moment, at this Feast of the Tabernacles, when Jesus stood up and started screaming at everybody, everybody help me at all, the CenterPoint campuses today, it was awkward, right? That was a bad moment, at least in the beginning. I'm sure the disciples are wondering, what are you doing, man? I'm sure they were all thinking, what's going on? I'm sure the high priest, I'm sure all of the authorities were like on standby. This crazy guy is screaming about what he's going to do and what he is offering. But let's look at what Jesus said. The first thing he does is he basically says, is anyone thirsty? And I think he would say that to us today as he's interrupting our life at the beginning of the year. Many of us are already getting ready. We're at the starting line to chase after a lot of things. We're going to chase after better health, better careers, better bodies. We're going to try to have better marriages, better, more. And I want to be the last guy to come in here and tell you that none of that's good. I think go chase things, but I just want you to be aware of this. Everything you chase besides Jesus will still leave you thirsty. You're still going to be thirsty. You can get the best body ever in the next 4 or 5 months, and you're still going to find yourself thirsty when you look in the mirror. Even though you look better, you're going to still be thirsty. And even if your marriage gets better than it is right now, there's still going to be more on the table. It's crazy, but you're going to be thirsty still. And so Jesus looks at a crowd of people who year after year had been coming and doing this big thing about how God was good and faithful and could provide for them. And he knows that they're still thirsty, even though they've been there all week. And trust me, they've been drinking plenty of water and wine. But Jesus wasn't talking about physical thirst, and that's not what he's talking about to us today. Because all of you can go out from your campus today, or even now you could go to the lobby, and you could get water or coffee or whatever you guys have in your lobbies at CenterPoint Church. You could quench your physical thirst. And by the way, human bodies are made a certain way. We need nourishment and we need water. We have to have hydration. You can go longer without food than you can water. That's how God made our bodies. But God didn't just make your physical body. God also made our spirits. And we're not just physical beings, we're spiritual beings. And you not only have a stomach, you have a heart. And I don't just mean your physical heart. You have a heart, soul, mind. See, there's a part of you that's physical. You can look at your hands right now sitting there. But there's also a part of you that's invisible. In fact, I would argue that the invisible part of you is what makes you who you really are. It's where you think, decide, feel. It's where your heart breaks. We all know that when we say, my heart is broken, you're not talking about your physical heart. You're talking about the invisible part of you. And God made both. And I want you to watch this, because your physical body gets thirsty and you get dehydrated. That can even be dangerous. The same is true for your heart, soul, and mind. The invisible part of you also gets thirsty. The invisible part of you also needs water. And in fact, just like when you're really thirsty as a human, you will do almost anything to quench that thirst. I want you to know that when you are spiritually thirsty, it's even more dangerous. Spiritual hydration is exponentially more important than physical hydration. And to be spiritually dehydrated, I would say, is exponentially more dangerous than being physically dehydrated. It's really dangerous for you to go long spiritually dry, because here's what happens. In the same way, look, I played a lot of ball growing up, and we do these 2-a-day things and football and stuff like that, and baseball and basketball, all these workouts, and I would get so thirsty that I would have, look, man, if you would have gotten me to a mud hole, I would have figured out a way to get the water out of it, because I was that thirsty. You get desperate. If you get thirsty enough, you get really desperate. And here's what happens spiritually. You go long enough without hydrating your soul, heart, and mind, you will go looking for something to quench that thirst. And you will look down a million roads. And many of us right now, unfortunately, at the beginning of the year, we're going to run really hard after a lot of things that ultimately cannot quench our thirst. They're not even bad things. They're just not the thing. And what I want to offer you today is an interruption. I know you got your plans. I know you're ready tomorrow. You're going to start eating dirt and lettuce and protein shakes for the next 3 months. I get it. I get that you're a little angry that I even put that picture of that turkey sandwich up. But here's the deal. I would have never had that experience that I love to tell the story about. And I would have never seen those beautiful fields and pastures and ranches and farms. I would have never had that experience had I not had my day interrupted. And these people got their festival and feast interrupted that day, watch this, by the only one ever worthy to interrupt that feast and festival. Now, why would Jesus interrupt that feast and festival and talk to them about being thirsty? Well, here's why. Because the whole thing was about water, remember? The whole thing was about God giving his people in the desert what they needed, water to drink. So Jesus looks at them like he looks at us and he says, hey, is anyone thirsty? And what he already knew the answer to that question. Everyone there was thirsty. And I can know this about you and I and all of us here today. I know that you and I probably have different accents, and I'm coming from a different part of the country. But here's something I know about us because we're both human, and it's this. We get thirsty spiritually. And without Jesus, you will remain constantly thirsty spiritually. In fact, a doctor, physician friend of mine tells me that a lot of people end up with chronic health issues because of persistent dehydration. It's that important for the human body. You can end up with cluster headaches. You can end up with skin issues. You can end up with cramping issues in your muscular system. And often the underlying cause is simply persistent and chronic dehydration, just not getting enough water. So he puts his patients immediately on drinking enough water, and often it changes their lives. Here's the deal. Many of us today are trying to fix things in our lives by running after different types of water, whether it's more money, better health, sex, relationships, whatever it is that you're running after. And here's the deal. You are trying to fix and quench a spiritual thirst with physical solutions. And it's just never going to work. It's never going to work. You cannot fix your spiritual thirst with physical solutions. You can't do it. You must go spiritual. And Jesus is saying, hey, if you're thirsty, guess what? You can come to me. The second thing I want to tell you today, first, Jesus is asking, if anyone thirst, anybody here thirsty, you can come to him. Secondly, the requirement to drink living water, which Jesus offers us spiritually, is to admit that you're thirsty. So I want you to understand that today. You got to admit you're thirsty. The first thing you got to do is raise your hand. That's why he asked the people at the festival. Anyone thirsty? Anyone need more than this little rite and ritual that they're doing today? That's what he said all those years ago. And I think on the first year, 2023, he would say that to all of us today at CenterPoint. He would say, are you thirsty? You've tried all these years, still thirsty, right? Admit you're thirsty. All you have to do is admit you're thirsty. And you need to understand, I want you to write it down, that your soul gets thirsty, just like your body does. Your soul gets thirsty. And you need to understand that just like your body was made to live on physical water, just like your body was made to live on physical hydration, your soul was made to live on God. Jesus is saying the only way to quench the thirst of your soul that drives you more than anything in your life is to have a relationship with him. And if you're a Christian, to keep drinking of him, to continue walking with him, because Christians get thirsty too. This is a well that we continue to drink from. And here's one of the great sadnesses for me is that in my church, and I bet in yours too, there are believers who have had a drink of Jesus. They've been to the well known as Jesus and had a big drink, and they understood, oh my goodness, this actually quenches my thirst. But then for some reason, we start chasing after other wells of water. And we end up getting thirsty again. Our souls were created to live on God. And so Jesus says, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. So you have to admit you're thirsty, and then you have to go to him. Since he's the only one that can quench your thirst, you have to come to him. And today, if you're not a believer in Christ, that means you have to come to him for the first time and say, I need you. But if you're a Christian, can I just tell you, one of the things you need to build into your life for this new year is you need to begin to drink of Jesus. It needs to become a part of your life. Fellowship with him. Get to know him through prayer and the word and fellowship with other believers and drink of Jesus. Because Jesus, write it down, is the living water. Jesus is living water. That's why he says, if anyone's thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Now that's kind of weird, right? How do you drink a person? How do you bottle that up? And I just want you to understand that he answers the question for us. If you think, wow, how do you drink Jesus? I know how to drink water. I know how to drink a Gatorade or a Powerade or a Celsius energy drink, but I don't. How do you drink of Jesus? And he tells you how. Look at the next verse. He says, if any of you are thirsty, let him come to me and drink. And here's how you drink of Jesus, verse 38. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. How do you drink of Jesus? You believe in him. You believe in him. That's how you drink of Jesus. You believe in him for the first time for salvation. You continue to drink of Jesus by continually depending on him and abiding in him and fellowshipping in him. The original language for the word believe is the idea of sitting down, the idea of pistuos, the Greek word. It means I'm sitting down. It's like sitting down in a chair. When you sit in a chair, you're trusting the weight of your body to the strength of that chair to hold you up. Well, when you believe upon Jesus, you're trusting your spiritual life into the spiritual strength of Jesus to quench your thirst, to transform your life, to sustain you. That's what he does. Jesus is the living water. And today I've come to show you that at their big, maybe favorite festival, Jesus interrupted it. They didn't see it coming. They didn't know on that day this guy was going to stand up and offer himself to them. What Jesus was saying to those Jewish people is he was saying, hey, all these years you've chased an idea, you've chased a promise. But you don't have to chase the promise anymore. This little thing you guys do with the water and the pouring it on the altar and then you sing that song about salvation, you don't have to do all that anymore because I am what this whole thing is about. And he's going to do that with the Feast of the Tabernacles and it won't be long and he's going to do it on the cross, right? We know that story. He's going to take care of the Passover on the cross and he takes care of the Feast of the Tabernacles on this day when he says, I am the living water that you guys are symbolizing with this entire ritual. I'm the living water. I can fulfill all of this, and I do fulfill all of this. And he looked at a group of Jewish people and he said, you don't have to chase this thing anymore. I'm here. And I think he would look at all of us and he would say, hey, it's okay to work out. It's okay to try to make more money this year. All those things are part of human life. But if you go make the most money and build the best body and have the most fulfilling marriage and your kids are healthy and popular and successful and you build that big house you always wanted to and just on and on and on. If you get all that stuff and you fail to drink of Jesus, you'll still be thirsty. You'll still be so thirsty. And then what ends up happening when all the things you chase, you finally get them and they don't quench your thirst, you are disappointed in the very things that you got and achieved. You end up disappointed in your marriage. You end up disappointed in your kids. You end up disappointed in that job. The house is never good enough. The car is never good enough. And it won't ever be good enough. You end up crushing the things you were meant to enjoy. You crush them under the weight of trying to quench your thirst because they weren't meant to quench your thirst. Your kids, your spouse. Tom Cruise lied to all of us when he said, you complete me, and Jerry Maguire all those years ago. We can't complete one another. I'm sorry, only Jesus can fill that space, folks. Listen to me today. You will crush everything in your life that you try to quench your thirst with besides Jesus, because only Jesus can do that. You know what's amazing? When you begin to drink of Jesus and you continue to as a Christian, you will end up more joyful in every other area of your life because you're not depending on anything else to quench the thirst that you know only Jesus can. So because Jesus quenches my thirst, now I can just love my wife and enjoy her and appreciate her. Because Jesus ultimately fulfills me, now my kids don't have to carry that weight. They don't have to prove anything to me. I can just love them and father them and be who I'm supposed to be. My friends don't have that pressure. My job, my ministry doesn't have that pressure. Because when I drink from Jesus, I'm not thirsty anymore. So I can have joy in my life. This is a game changer. This is an interruption that you want. The best thing that happened that week, I'm sure the wine was great. They were known for that. I'm sure the dancing was awesome. I hear they had amazing DJs at this thing in the ancient world. But I think the best thing that happened that week was the interruption. I know that my trip to Tampa, as much as I enjoyed the conference, the thing I'll talk about the rest of my life is that sandwich, because my day got interrupted. It didn't go the way I planned it. And it ended up being awesome. And the Feast of the Tabernacles that year, it didn't go the way they planned. But it ended up being awesome. We're still talking about it to this day. Jesus says to us, come drink of me. And today I brought up here, to just kind of close this out, I brought up here a Red Bull. And let me tell you what many of us do in the church. We know about Jesus, but Jesus did not say to that crowd that day, learn about me. Become better theologians, not that that's a bad thing. Become better knowledgeable about the Bible. That would have been good, but that's not what he said. He said, drink of me. Now, Red Bull got all this energy, and I could tell you all about it. I could learn all the ingredients, but I really don't know Red Bull until I experience it. And that's true of Jesus as well. I think there's a lot of us here today maybe at one of these campuses. And you know about Jesus, you've been kind of on the edge, but have you ever actually experienced him? And I think today is such an honor for me to be speaking to you guys. But I want to offer you Jesus. I don't want to offer you a better way, 3 steps. Not that those things are bad, but I want you to drink of Jesus and experience him by believing in him. That's what he said. By really believing in him today. And if you're a Christian, you're not believing for salvation, you've already done that, but to believe upon him for your today, for your tomorrow, to make him the thing, the center of your life. And so what I would say today is, pop the top on the thing. Don't just look at it. Take a, oh man, I already feel the energy. Take a sip. Take a sip. Take a drink of Jesus today. Yes, I am starting off your year at church saying, come take a drink. Want to have a drink? A drink of Jesus, the well that never runs dry. So today it is my honor to speak to you guys. I love your pastor. I love your church. I hope to get to be with you in person one day. But I would say to you today as you kick off this year, come to Jesus and drink of him. And if you ever find yourself on a long, winding country road in northwest Florida and on the edge of Georgia and Alabama, and you come across a sign that says Madison, Florida, I recommend you go on down that road. And if you end up downtown, I want you to look for a place called Grumpy's Diner. And if you end up in Grumpy's Diner, trust me on this one. Order the goblet. Thank you guys so much. I want to pray for you now. Jesus, thank you for all of our churches. And I pray that you will have your hand on us as we start this new year and help us to drink deeply of you and help us to not be satisfied with just knowing about you. Help us to experience you and believe upon you. Thank you for interrupting all of human history by coming. And we just spent all these weeks celebrating Emmanuel, God with us, but you didn't just come and stand by us. You invited us to know you. And so today, may we be a people at CenterPoint and beyond who want to drink of you and experience you so that we're not thirsty anymore. We'll be much better when we're not thirsty because we're drinking of you. And I thank you for all my brothers and sisters here today. I pray it all in Jesus' good name. Amen.